The file came to me the way most of them do, as a thinning manila folder with a routing slip stapled to the front and 3 different supervisors' initials on it, each of them passing it down the chain until it reached the person whose job is to look at the things nobody wants to be responsible for deciding about. That person is me. I have been the fleet safety investigator for this county for 11 years. And before that, I ran a winter maintenance crew out of the North Barn for 14. I know what plowware looks like. I know what a tired operator's incident statement sounds like. I know the difference between a guy padding his hours and a guy who genuinely cannot account for 40 minutes of his shift. So when Dale Petrowski in risk management dropped the route file on my desk and said, "This one's been kicking around, see if there's a training gap," I took it as exactly what it appeared to be. A cluster of minor incidents on one storm route, probably traceable to one bad habit that had spread through a crew. The route was logged on the storm board as Upper Branch 9, but the operators called it the tallow grade. That was the first thing I wrote down because the official designation and the radio name didn't match. And mismatched names are usually where the rot starts. Crews invent shorthand. Shorthand outlives the reason for it. I assumed somebody 15 years ago had named it after a logging family or a creek, and that the name had stuck the way these things do. What I had in front of me was 4 seasons of small stuff. Nothing that would ever make a newspaper. Plow blades returning with edge wear on the carbide inserts that didn't match the lane miles logged for that route. A blade is rated for a certain number of miles of contact before the carbide is gone, and you can read a used blade like tree rings. These blades were coming back chewed down like they'd run twice the distance the ABL said they had. I've seen guys grind a blade running it too low and dragging on dry pavement, but that leaves a specific signature, a polished scarring along the moldboard. This wasn't that. This was honest wear, just too much of it. Then the material loads. Sand and salt loading sheets that didn't reconcile against log lane miles for the same trucks on the same nights. A spinner throws material like calibrated rate. You know your pounds per lane mile, you know your route length, you can do the arithmetic in your head. The tallow grade trucks were coming back empty or near it, having spread a full load on a route that the book said was 11 miles one way. 11 miles, even at a heavy winter rate, does not consume a full 8-yard load of sand salt mix 2.5 times over. I checked the spinner calibration reports first because that's the boring answer. A spinner running fast dumps material and skews everything. Get when the easy explanation keeps failing. A safety investigation is mostly the process of eliminating the boring causes until you're left with the one nobody wanted, which is usually that somebody is lying to cover a mistake. I figured I'd find a crew that had quietly extended the route on their own, salting some unofficial stretch of forest road or a private grade for a rancher who slipped them something, and logging it under the tallow grade because that was the closest assignment. That happens. Crews do favors, crews take shortcuts, material walks off. That's contractor fraud adjacent stuff, and I've built cases on it before. It would explain the extra miles on the blades and the extra material spread, an unofficial spur. That was my working theory, and it was a good one. So I pulled the AVL traces. Every truck in our fleet carries automatic vehicle location, a GPS unit that drops a breadcrumb every few seconds and reports speed, heading, spinner status, and plow down status back to dispatch. It's there for liability and routing efficiency and, frankly, for catching the exact kind of off-route favor I was expecting to find. If a crew was running an unofficial spur, the breadcrumbs would show it. A line of dots peeling off the official route, climbing somewhere it shouldn't, and coming back. That is not what the traces showed. The traces showed the trucks running Upper Branch 9 out to the official turnaround at the 11-mile point, sitting at the turnaround for an interval, and coming back, clean. In spec, the breadcrumbs matched the log route almost exactly. The problem was the gaps. At the turnaround and at 2 points along the climb, the breadcrumb log went dead. Not erratic, not scattered, which is what you see when a unit loses sky in heavy timber or a deep cut. Dead, a clean stop in the data, and then a clean resume, sometimes 8 minutes later, sometimes 40, with the truck reporting from roughly the same coordinates it had gone dark at. During those gaps, the engine data kept logging through a separate channel. The telematics that track RPM and fuel burn and hydraulic pressure off the CAN bus. And those showed the truck working. Spinner engaged, plow down, hydraulics cycling to angle the blade, fuel burning at a rate consistent with a loaded truck climbing under load. The GPS said the truck was parked. The engine said the truck was plowing. I sat with that for a while. A dead GPS with a live engine is not by itself impossible. You can lose the location module and keep the rest, but you'd expect it to be one unit, one bad antenna, an intermittent fault you could chase down to a connector. This was every truck assigned to the route, across 4 seasons, going dark in the same places. That's not a hardware fault. A hardware fault doesn't pick a geography. The fuel burn was what moved me from irritated to careful. I compared fuel burn for the tallow-grade trucks against their log route distance and against comparable routes of similar grade and length elsewhere in the county. The tallow-grade trucks burned fuel like they were running a route 2 to 3 times longer than 11 miles, under heavier load at lower average speed. The numbers were internally consistent. The blade wear, the material spread, and the fuel burn all agreed with each other. They all described the same longer, harder route. The only thing that disagreed was the GPS and the map. When 3 independent physical measurements agree, and only the location data disagrees, you stop trusting the location data. That's the discipline, physical evidence over telemetry. A blade doesn't lie about how far it dragged. Fuel doesn't lie about how hard the engine worked. So I made myself say it plainly in my notes, because writing it down is how I keep from flinching. The trucks were doing 2 to 3 times the work the route should require, and the work was real, and it was happening somewhere the GPS could not see. I went to the operators next. This is the part of the job I'm actually good at. I've sat across from enough drivers to know that the truth usually arrives in the throwaway lines, the stuff they say while they're standing up to leave. I started with the workers' comp narratives, because pain doesn't lie either. Over the 4 seasons, there were 11 comp filings tied to Upper Branch 9 crews, which is a high number for a single route. Most were strain claims, lower back and shoulder, consistent with long hours fighting a plow. 2 were more interesting. One operator, a man named Verl Hauk, with 19 years in, had filed for what the form called acute stress reaction and disorientation on shift. His narrative was 4 sentences. He wrote that he had been running the grade in the convoy, that he had lost the taillights of the truck ahead of him for what he believed was a short time, that when he found them again, he could not say how long he had been alone, and that he had pulled to the shoulder afterward and could not stop shaking. The county doctor had signed him off for 3 shifts. He had come back and run the route again the following storm. That last detail stayed with me. He came back and ran it again. The second interesting one was a younger driver, 2nd season, who had filed for a panic episode and then quietly transferred to a valley route. His narrative was longer and more frightened, and his supervisor had appended a note suggesting the kid may not be suited to mountain winter ops. I read that note as what it was, an experienced man explaining away a green man's fear so the route could keep running. I interviewed Hawk in the break room at the North Barn on a clear afternoon in October before the season started. He's a big, slow-talking man, the kind of operator you want on your worst route because nothing rattles him. I asked him to walk me through the tallow grade. He described it the way you'd describe any bad mountain route. Steep, narrow, a drop-off on the outside that you respect. He talked about the switchbacks, the way the grade pitched up after the second cattle guard, the stand of dead timber where the wind cross-loaded the snow and built drift you had to hit at speed or you'd plug your blade. He talked about a particular cut where the rock came down close on the driver's side and you tucked your mirror. He talked about the delineator posts on the outside edge, the reflective markers, and how they took a beating up there. How he'd clipped one once and put in the marker replacement ticket himself. It was a completely ordinary account of a hard route. Specific, tired, technically exact. He told me the snow depths he'd called in, the spots where ice built up off a seep in the rock, the place where chains were worth the time to put on. He told me he'd snapped a chain up there twice, and once had to limp down on 3 corners. He knew the route in his hands and his back. So I asked him to show it to me on the map. I had the county map open, the official one, the route printed on it. He put his finger on the start of Upper Branch 9 and traced it up to the second cattle guard, and then his finger stopped. And he looked at it for a while and he said, "It doesn't really go like the map after that." I asked him what he meant. He said, "The map's got it dead ending at the turnaround. It doesn't dead end. You keep going up. There's another, 6, 7 miles past where the map quits." He moved his finger off the paper, off the printed road, into the blank green of the contour lines, and held it there over nothing. Over a stretch of mountainside where the map showed no road at all, and he tapped it twice like he was pointing at something he could see. "Up in here. The dead timber, the close cut, the bad drift, it's all up in here." I asked him, careful, how you get there if there's no road on the map, and he gave me an answer I have thought about every day since. He didn't say there's a hidden turnoff. He didn't say the map is wrong. He shrugged the way you shrug at a question with an obvious answer, and he said, "You're plowing. You just keep plowing, and it's there. You follow the truck ahead of you, and you keep your blade down, and it's there. Coming back's the same. You turn around at the top, and you plow back down, and it puts you out at the turnaround again." He paused, and then he added the thing that I have never been able to file under any ordinary cause, because it was offered as practical advice and not as a confession of anything strange. He said, "Don't try to go up there in a pickup to look at it in summer. Couple of the new supervisors tried that. There's nothing there in summer. You can walk all over that slope and there's no road. It's only a road when you're working it." He said it the way you'd tell a new guy not to bother chaining up on a route that doesn't need it. A piece of operational knowledge. A thing the crew had learned and absorbed and stopped questioning, because questioning it didn't help you get the route done, and getting the route done was the job. I did not argue with him. You don't argue with a witness, and you especially don't argue with a calm one. I thanked him and I went back to my office and I sat for a long time without writing anything down, which is unusual for me. I want to describe my own resistance, because I think it's the most important part of this account. Everything I had was operational. Blade wear, fuel burn, material spread, comp narratives, AVL gaps, one veteran's plain testimony. Not one piece of it required me to believe anything impossible on its own. Each piece had a boring potential explanation. Blades wear, calibrations drift, GPS drops in timber, operators get confused in storms, men exaggerate a hard route. My entire professional training was built to assemble boring explanations out of pieces exactly like these. The problem was that the boring explanations had stopped reconciling with each other. To keep them, I'd have to believe in a different unrelated failure for every single measurement. All of them coincidentally clustered on one route. All of them coincidentally agreeing about a longer, harder road. And a whole veteran crew coincidentally lying in the same technically precise way. Occam doesn't take you there. Occam, applied honestly, takes you toward the thing, Hawks said. which I could not write in a safety report and keep my job. So I did what an investigator does when the testimony and the telemetry point the same direction, and he doesn't believe either of them. I tried to disprove it the cheapest way available. I tried to go, look, I went up Upper Branch 9 in a county pickup on a clear, dry day in late October. I drove it to the turnaround at the 11-mile point. The road ends there. It genuinely ends. There's a graveled turnaround, a county sign reading End County Maintenance, and beyond it, the slope goes up steep and timbered with no grade cut into it, no roadbed, no old logging scar, nothing. I got out and I walked uphill for the better part of an hour, in the direction Hawk's finger had pointed. I am a roadman. I can read a slope for a roadbed that's grown over, the way the ground holds a cut and fill long after the surface is gone, the way the trees grow younger in a line. There was nothing. The slope was undisturbed forest, old growth in places, ground that had clearly never had a blade on it. There was no road. There had never been a road. I want to be precise about that because it is the hinge of everything. In clear weather, on solid ground, with my own eyes and 40 years of reading terrain, I can tell you that the place where 11 veteran operators have been plowing for years does not exist. I drove back down and I checked the marker replacement tickets against the map. The crews had filed dozens of tickets for delineator posts on the upper grade, with mile markers past the 11-mile end of the road. The barn had purchased and installed the posts. The procurement was real. The whiteboard in the north barn had tallow grade chalked into the storm rotation with a little notation next to it. 2-truck minimum, no solo, in handwriting older than the current crew lead. 2-truck minimum, no solo runs. A rule somebody had written and everybody obeyed and nobody I asked could tell me who wrote. I'll compress the next part because methodical work makes for slow reading and the shape of it is what matters. Over the early winter, I built the file the way I'd build any file. I pulled dash cam footage, and on the tallow grade footage, there were continuity gaps that matched the AVL dead zones. The timestamp jumping forward, while the headlights showed the truck still climbing through falling snow. The road ahead unchanged in a way that should have been impossible if 8 minutes had passed at plow speed. I pulled the radio dispatch recordings, and the crews talked about the upper grade in the same flat operational language Hawk had used, calling hazards, calling drift, calling a clipped marker at mile 14 on a road that ended at 11, dispatch acknowledging it without a flicker, logging it because dispatch had been logging mile 14 on the tallow grade for longer than this dispatcher had held the chair. The hydraulic hose replacement logs showed the upper grade trucks blowing hoses at a rate that fit hard sustained plowing on steep ground. The wash bay residue notes, which I'd never had reason to read before in my life, recorded the crew washing pine sap and a fine reddish gravel off the undercarriages of the tallow grade trucks. Sap from timber in a gravel color that matches no roadbed material the county has ever spread, and no rock unit I could find mapped on that slope. Every piece pointed the same way. Real work, real wear, real material, real damage. Somewhere real on a road that is not there when nobody is working it. I requested to ride along. I want to be careful here not to make it sound braver or more reckless than it was. I rode along because that is what the procedure demanded. You cannot close a safety review on a route you have not observed in operating conditions. I had observed it dry and empty. I needed to observe it working. I told the crew lead, a woman named Sandra Kowitz with 22 years in, that I was riding to evaluate convoy procedure and fatigue management. That was true. I just didn't tell her it was the only way I could think of to test whether a road could be made out of work. The storm came in the first week of January, a real one, a foot called for up high with wind. They run the tallow grade in exactly these conditions and not otherwise, which I had noted and filed and now understood as the operating envelope of the thing. I rode in the second truck of a two-truck convoy in the seat next to a quiet operator named Mendez, behind Coates's lead truck. We staged at the barn, we loaded material, we ran out the highway and up Upper Branch 9 in the dark, with the snow coming sideways through the headlights. We reached the second cattle guard. I felt the truck cross it. After that, I stopped being able to reconcile what I knew with what I was inside of. I will describe it the way I describe it in a report, which is the only way I can describe it without coming apart. We did not turn. There was no branch, no spur, no gate, no turnoff. Mendez kept the blade down and followed Coates's taillights, and we kept climbing, and the road kept being under us. It was not a road that appeared. That's the thing I cannot make people understand. It did not flicker into being. It was simply there. The way a road is there, gravel and pitch, and a fall line off the right shoulder that Mendez respected without comment. The switchbacks Hawk described came up one after another. The cattle guard I'd felt was the last feature I could match to the map. Everything past it was the route the operators knew and the map denied. The close cut where Mendez tucked the mirror. The stand of dead timber where the drift cross-loaded so hard Mendez gunned it to keep the blade from plugging. And I was thrown against the belt, and the snow came over the windshield in a wall. The delineator posts on the outside edge, reflecting our amber beacon. Posts I had personally confirmed did not exist on a slope I had personally walked. The radio said we were past mile 14. The truck's dashboard odometer, which counts wheel rotations and does not care about satellites, agreed. We had gone more than 14 miles up a road that ends at 11, and we were still climbing, and the work was the most ordinary thing in the world. Mendez was bored. That is what I keep returning to. He was tired and bored and watching for the next drift. He'd done this 30 times. To him it was a bad route in weather. To me it was the floor of the world dropping away, and he offered me coffee from his thermos somewhere around what the radio called mile 16, on a road that the county map and my own feet both swore was a forested slope. I asked him, as level as I could keep it, what was at the top. He said the grade flattened out into a saddle, and there was a wide spot where you turned the truck around, and then you plowed back down. He said it like it was nothing. He said you didn't want to stop up there longer than the turn took. I asked him why. He thought about it and said he didn't know. You just didn't. The older guys always said, keep it moving, finish the turn and get your blade back down and head down. And once your blade was down again, you were fine. He said it the way you'd repeat any piece of barn wisdom whose reason had worn off, but whose practice you kept because the men who taught it had survived. We made the turn at the saddle. I will tell you that I looked in the few seconds we were up there, with the truck swinging around, and the headlights crossed open ground and falling snow and nothing else I could resolve. And I understood Mendez's rule in my body before I understood it in my head, the way you understand not to look down off a height. I did not want the blade up. I wanted it down and cutting. The work was the thing that was holding us inside the road, and stopping the work felt in a way I cannot defend on paper, like letting go of a railing. We plowed down. We came out at the 11-mile turnaround, exactly as Hawk had said, the N County maintenance sign sliding past the window, and the AVL in the dash, which I'd been watching, came back to life right there and reported us at the turnaround as if it had never lost us, as if the last hour of the impossible grade had been the truck sitting parked at the end of the road. We ran back to the barn. Mendez logged his miles, the official 11, and put a note in the book about a clipped marker up at mile 15, and went home to sleep. I sat in the empty break room until it got light. I am not going to pretend I solved it, because I didn't, and the people who keep this route running don't think of it as something to solve. That was the realization that finally settled the matter for me, and it is worse than any explanation could have been. I went looking for one person who understood the mechanism, the way you always assume there's a man at the bottom of a fraud who knows where the money goes. There isn't one. I talked to Coetz, who has run it for 22 years, and she does not think it is a mystery. She thinks it is a bad route that has to be run in weather, the same as Hawk does, the same as Mendez does. When I pressed her gently on how a road can be there in the storm and gone in July, she gave me a look I've gotten from operators my whole career. The look a working person gives a manager who has started asking philosophical questions about a job that simply needs doing. She said, "It needs plowing when it snows. We plow it when it snows. I don't know what you want me to do with that." And the thing is, she's right. The route produces work, and the work produces results, and the results are real. The wear and the material and the cleared grade that the next storm finds drifted in again. And a result that real does not leave room for a manager's doubt. The fear, when it finally arrived in me, was not fear of the road. It was the recognition that a dozen competent people had looked at the same impossible thing I was looking at and had quietly decided it was simply a hard part of the job, and that their decision was operationally correct. I made the calls I was obligated to make. I phoned the neighboring county's road yard to ask sideways whether they'd ever had route reconciliation problems on their high storm corridors, whether they'd seen blade wear or material loads that didn't pencil out. The maintenance super over there, a man I've known 20 years, got quiet in a way that told me more than the answer did. And then he said they ran a couple of grades in heavy weather that weren't really on the system the regular way, and that they had a 2-truck rule and a don't linger at the top rule. And he used a phrase for one of them, the back grade. There wasn't a place name I could find on his county's map either. He didn't think it was strange that I was asking. He thought I was asking the normal mutual aid question about whether we could lend trucks across the line in a big storm. He said, "Sure, send your language and codes over. We'll match them up like always." Like always. I got off the phone understanding that this is not one route and not one county, that there is a whole layer of these corridors held open by ordinary crews in bad weather, passed down as barn rules and shiftboard shorthand, coordinated across jurisdictions in the same flat operational language we use for everything else, and that nobody at any level treats it as anything but a difficult part of winter operations. Because from inside the work, that is exactly what it is, which leaves the decision, which is mine, and which I have now made. The clean recommendation, the one any safety investigator is supposed to write, is suspension. Route presents unquantifiable risk. Telemetry cannot confirm operator location. Access conditions cannot be reproduced or verified. Fatigue and injury rates exceed acceptable thresholds. Recommend Upper Branch 9 be closed at the 11-mile maintained terminus and removed from the storm rotation pending review. I drafted that. I had it in front of me for a week. I did not file it, and I want to be exact about why. Because it is not courage, and it is not belief, and it is not that I was told not to. It is that I asked Coetz and Hawk the only question that mattered, which was whether the road stops being there if we stop plowing it. And they did not say yes. Hawk, who has run it 19 years, said the road doesn't care whether we maintain it. He said the snow still falls up there whether or not we cut it, and the drift still loads in the dead timber. And the only difference our plowing makes is that the route stays a route, stays cut, stays passable, stays ours. He said the old crews always understood that they weren't building the road, and they weren't permitted to think they could close it. They were keeping it open. He would not say open for what, and I do not think he knows. And I have decided I do not want to be the supervisor who finds out what an unmaintained one of these becomes, or what comes down off a grade that nobody is cutting back anymore. So I wrote the other recommendation. I formalized the convoy protocol. I put it in policy language, dressed in the risk management vocabulary that lets a county do a thing without admitting what the thing is. Restricted storm deployment, Upper Branch 9, severe weather only. 2-truck minimum, no solo operation. Continuous plowdown operation required through the upper grade. No extended stops above the maintained terminus. Maximum dwell at the upper turnaround not to exceed the time required to reverse direction. Operator rotation to manage fatigue. A VL telemetry acknowledged as unreliable above the cattle guard. Odometer and material reconciliation to serve as the records of work performed. I wrote, in the calm hand of a man documenting a procedure, every survival rule the crews had taught each other for 40 years. And I signed it. And I believe almost none of what it implies and all of what it requires. It is October again now, and I am reviewing the winter operations prep, which is the ordinary cycle of my year. The mutual aid coordination sheets came in from the neighboring districts. The lists of route codes we exchanged so that a truck lent across the county line knows what it's being sent to run. I read them the way I read everything now, which is to say I read them properly for the first time. 3 of the districts have route codes on their severe weather-only lists that follow the same structure as ours. A real maintained route number paired with an informal grade name, a 2-truck flag, a no-linger flag. I don't know the names of their roads. I recognize the shape of them. I recognize a back grade and a high cut, and a route that someone 4 counties over knows in their hands and their back and cannot find in July, held open by a crew who thinks of it as a hard part of the job, and is, by every operational measure I have, correct. I approved the mutual aid language. I sent ours over. We'll match them up like always, and when the first real storm comes in this winter, the trucks will go up Upper Branch 9 with their blades down, and the road will be there because they are working it, and they will keep it open the way it has always been kept open, and I will sign whatever the morning after requires me to sign. I understand the procedure now better than anyone in the department, which is the same as understanding nothing, except in the one way that counts. I know that we do not maintain the road because we found it. We maintain it because someone has to keep it cut, and the alternative has never been tested by anyone who came back to file the report. That is not a conclusion, it is just the job, and I have decided, the way Hawk decided and Coates decided and whoever chalked that whiteboard decided, to keep doing it.